Question, Debbie Abrahams.
To ask the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to make a statement on the Supreme Court's ruling of the 9th of November on the under-occupancy charge.
The Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Secretary Damian Green.
Mr. Speaker, the removal of the spare room subsidy was introduced in April 2013 to all working age claimants in the social rented sector as part of this government's plan to create a welfare system that's fair for those who use it and for those who pay for it. Before then, under the previous system, the taxpayer had to subsidise benefit claimants to live in houses which were larger than they needed. This was despite the fact that people who rent in the private sector already received housing benefit based on the number of people in the household rather than the number of bedrooms they have. This has been the case since 1996. Since we introduced the policy, it saved over £1.5 billion, and the number of households affected by the policy is going down. We, of course, operate a number of exemptions to the policy, and these include all pensioners, households with a dependent child receiving the middle or higher rate care component in DLA, households where an overnight carer is allowed for the claimant or partner, households where the claimant or partner is a foster carer, and households with an adult child who is in the armed forces and who is deployed on operations. In addition, we provide local authorities with funding to provide discretionary housing payments to claimants that they evaluate as needing additional support with housing costs. Turning to the Supreme Court's judgment last week, it's welcome that the Court found in our favour in 5 out of the 7 cases. These were cases relating to a panic room, a claimant with mental health issues, those requiring an extra room to house medical equipment, or for shared care and adapted properties. The Court also agreed with our view that discretionary housing payments are generally an appropriate and lawful way to provide assistance to those who need extra help. In the 2 specific cases where the Court did not find in our favour, we will of course take steps to ensure we comply with the judgment. In most cases, local authorities are best placed to understand the needs of their residents, which is why, by the end of this Parliament, we will have provided them with over £1 billion to provide that support. This ensures that people in difficult situations and those who are vulnerable don't lose out.
The Abraham.
The Supreme Court's judgment on Wednesday clearly stated that the bedroom tax is discriminatory, as this side of the House has repeatedly highlighted. The Court upheld the claims of Jacqueline Carmichael, who is disabled and cannot share a room with her husband Jason, as well as that of Paul and Susan Rutherford, who care for their severely disabled grandson Warren. I would like to pay tribute to them, as well as the other families, for their courage, tenacity and determination pursuing these cases. The ruling states that housing benefit regulations allowing claimants to have an additional bedroom where children cannot share a bedroom because of a disability should be extended to adults. Likewise, adults who need an extra room for an overnight carer who have been exempt from the bedroom tax, but children such as Warren have not. These anomalies, the judges ruled, were manifestly without reason. The Department spokesperson has indicated that the Government accept the Supreme Court's ruling. Can the Secretary of State confirm that his department unequivocally does so? Will he let this House know how much taxpayers' money has been spent in total on legal fees attempting to defend the Government's bedroom tax policy? How many families does the Department calculate have been affected by the Government's unlawful imposition of the bedroom tax on disabled people and their carers? When and how will the Government inform the families affected by this judgment? How quickly will the Government comply with the Supreme Court's judgment and revoke the bedroom tax for these families? And will such a revocation be updated, and if so, when? Will the Government now formally apologise for the pain and suffering inflicted on disabled people and families caring for a disabled child? And finally, will the Government undertake to look again at their policy on safe rooms for victims of domestic violence, which affect a relatively small number of incredibly vulnerable women who live in their lives in fear and are being punished by the Government for heeding security advice and being safe in their homes?
First of all, I'm happy to repeat what I said in my statement, that of course we accept the view of the Court, and we will, in answer to some of her subsequent questions, take the appropriate action as soon as we practically can. She also said that the removal of the spare room subsidy was unlawful. it patently isn't unlawful, because the 7 cases before the Supreme Court, they found in the government's favour in 5 of those cases. And what's interesting is that every one of those cases, all 7 of the cases, were receiving discretionary housing payments. These are the best way to ensure that those who are affected by this, if they need help, can be helped. Discretionary housing payments are up 5 times since 2011-12, and the government is committed to another £870 million worth of discretionary housing payments over the next 5 years. And I'm surprised that the Honourable Lady is complaining about them from a sedentary position, because her own local authority received the best part of £500,000 in discretionary housing payments this year. So it is clear that in her own area people find them very useful. She might also be interested to know that those who are affected and who are unemployed, of those 63% have decided to look for work, which I think shows one of the effects of this policy. And I hope she will address the basic issue of fairness, which is that without this, neighbouring households could be treated differently, and I think many people would regard that as unfair. She made the point about those receiving disability benefits. I would point out, as I said, all 7 of the cases were people receiving discretionary housing payments, and of 4 of the 5 people whose cases were won by the government, 4 of those have a disability. So it is clearly not unlawful. Her basic analysis of this is wrong. And of course the government is spending £50 billion a year on disability benefits, showing that absolutely we want to have a practical system that cares for people with a disability, and that this court case does not alter that at all.
Justin Tomlinson.
Speaker, can I remind the Secretary of State the real anger is not from the benches opposite, but from the 241,000 families in overcrowded accommodation who are desperate to access family homes. It is these families, not the benches opposite, the Secretary of State should be listening to.
Well, my honourable friend, who knows obviously a huge amount about this area, is absolutely right, and he knows that the government is indeed taking steps to try and alleviate the problems with housing, but he is quite right about the level of indignation on the opposition benches.
To Ailey Whiteford.
Mr Speaker, I do think the Supreme Court ruling last week is a damning indictment of the Government's willingness to make disabled people and their families bear the brunt of austerity cuts. The court ruling follows hard on the heels of a report by the UN Committee on the Rights of Disabled People, also published in recent days, which, among other conclusions, notes that this Government's measures have, quote, caused financial hardship to persons with disabilities, resulting in arrears, debts, evictions and cuts to essentials. I'm sorry that it's necessary today to remind the Secretary of State that, according to the Government's own impact assessment, across the UK, around 2/3 of the households affected by the bedroom tax are the home of a disabled adult. In Scotland, the proportion is a massive 80%, and I'm proud that the Scottish Government has taken action to protect all families affected by it. But will the Government now recognise that the bedroom tax has failed in its objectives, that it continues to harm disabled people, and finally call time on this destructive and discriminatory experiment?
Don't agree with the honourable lady about that, and indeed nor does the Supreme Court. As I've said, they had 7 cases before them. 5 of them they found in favour of the government. So I think the honourable lady is wrong saying that the policy has been in any way found unlawful. And she will have seen my response to the UN report, which I thought was out of date, and also just took completely the wrong approach, measuring the effectiveness of a policy towards disabled people purely by the amount of benefits spent. Actually, it's the amount of practical help they can get. The fact that we've had 300,000 more disabled people going to work in recent years shows, I think, the success of the government's policies in helping disabled people, and I hope that on the opposition benches as well there will be a welcome for the recent Green Paper we produced, which will provide more practical help for disabled people.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Will there be any retreat from fairer, rational allocation of housing?
No, there won't. I'm happy to reassure my right honourable friend that the fair and rational allocation of housing is not only sensible in terms of housing policy, it's also fair because, as I have said, it is clearly sensible that people who are in the social rented sector and the private sector should be treated as equally as possible in terms of benefits.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In 2014, I had the privilege of meeting Paul and Sue Rutherford and their grandson, Warren. That meeting left a profound impact on me. They are heroes in our community and they should be treated as such by the government rather than penalised with policies like the bedroom tax. When they were first charged the bedroom tax, they applied for discretionary housing payment and weren't granted it. They only got it on appeal. So the idea that discretionary housing payment is helping all families is just wrong. After the court verdict, Paul Rutherford said that he was happy but exhausted, but he should never have had to go through what he went through. So can I ask the Minister, how many more families have been illegally charged the bedroom tax, and when will they stop being charged it?
Well, I appreciate that the honourable lady has campaigned very effectively for a long time with the Rutherford family, and indeed, as she said herself, they received discretionary housing payments. This is the main tool we're using to make sure that people in this position are given appropriate help. We are still obviously looking at the numbers that may be affected from this case, but I can only repeat that we will take steps to make sure that, of course, we comply with the court judgment.
Caulfield.
Agree with me that I find it strange that members opposite are protesting when in 2008 they introduced exactly the same changes to the private rented sector. And does he agree with me that there should be equality for housing benefit tenants, whether they're in social housing or the private rented sector?
I do agree with my honourable friend, and I think that the fact that the opposition benchers tried to shout her down rather than listen to her question suggests that she hit the mark with it.
David Winnick.
No improvement, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid, on his predecessor. Is he aware, however, there's one advantage of the bedroom tax, namely it's a constant reminder of a Tory vendetta against social tenants, particularly those on low incomes. He should be thoroughly ashamed of himself who is coming out with the same Tory line as his predecessor, and illustrates the Tory government hasn't changed at all as a result of a new Prime Minister.
I'm not sure the honourable gentleman asked a question, but his idea of a vendetta against tenants in social housing is completely bizarre, given the number of social rented homes under the previous Labour government, which he supported, fell by 420,000, while waiting lists increased. And more than twice as much council housing has been built since 2010 than in the previous 13 years. So I'm afraid this government and its predecessor, the coalition government, is proving a much better friend of those tenants than the previous Labour government.
Yes. Mr. Opperman, you are a cerebral figure in the House. You now occupy a high office as a government whip. Chuntering from a sedentary position and gesticulation, even under provocation, is not quite the statesman-like posture that we have come to expect from a man of your exalted status. Mr. James Cartledge.
Reassured to hear my right friend that the number of claimants for this subsidy is actually falling, and that he confirmed that a part of this is due to people moving into work from benefits. Surely there are always difficult cases in the welfare system, cases that fall outside the normal rules, but surely the big picture is that worklessness, which is the biggest cause of poverty, is at an all-time low, and that the spare room subsidy has played a part in delivering that.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend. It is a small role that it's played, but it does play a role, and it is consistent with the rest of our welfare policy, which is making sure because the work is the best route out of poverty, we have made sure that as few people as possible face worklessness and are helped better than ever before, that we help more people to make sure they can get into work and progress in work. I'm afraid the opposition doesn't understand any of that.
By the way, it's also a proud product of the University of Buckingham in my own constituency. There's another consideration to boot. Mr. Stephen Timms.
Mr. Speaker, the bedroom tax has always hit disabled people especially hard. More than any other single measure, it's driven the increase in food bank use and in penury that we're seeing in communities up and down the country. Surely it is now time, finally, simply to abandon this hated measure.
I usually don't agree with the underlying analysis of the honourable gentleman. I know has considerable expertise in this area, but the fact is that across the social rented sector as a whole, approximately two-thirds of claimants are disabled, and it was initially estimated that under two-thirds of those potentially affected by this measure could be considered disabled. So that fact shows that there is actually no disproportionate impact of the type he claimed.
Ms Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend make sure that local authorities are making discretionary housing payments clearly marked and marketed to constituents, particularly disabled people? This process I've had to explain in my surgery to people worried about this area, and the local councils can do better.
My honourable friend is right that some local authorities are not taking up their full allocation of the central government funding for discretionary housing payments. And indeed, on top of that, of course, local authorities are allowed to increase the amount given by central government by 2.5 times if they feel it's necessary. So there are considerable sums available under discretionary housing payments, and I would join her in urging local authorities to use them.
And Diana Johnson.
Speaker, the Secretary of State just talked about getting people back into work, and I just wondered, with the proposal around the pay to stay, with tenants probably seeing a hike in their rent of £87 a month, is it really fair for the government to be talking about making work pay by attracting striving people who are trying to get back into work through a new scheme like pay to stay?
Well, I don't think the scheme has the effect the honourable lady fears, and I mean, I can stand here and recite figures for her if she likes, but it is patently the case that more people are in work than before. We've got more women in work than ever before in our history. Unemployment is at the lowest for more than 10 years. So there has been huge success in the welfare policy in getting people into work, and if you accept that work is the best route out of poverty, then that is the best measure any government can take to alleviate poverty in the long term.
Hollowbone. I declare my interest as a member of Kettering Borough Council. Can my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, confirm to the House that disability spending will be higher in each year of this Parliament than was the case in 2010?
I can, and my honourable friend makes the point with the particular expertise he has, no doubt, of dealing with these cases, not just as a member of this House, but as a local councillor as well. Indeed, I've said the figures earlier about disability spending, and it is indeed rising.
Greg Mulholland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not only councils, housing organisations and charities who have made clear that the people who are now exempted through the court case should have been exempted all along. But the Secretary of State also realises that he failed to listen to the will of this House when it passed the Affordable Homes Bill. Will he now listen and also make sure that where people cannot find homes because there are no suitable homes to move to, that they are also not penalised?
Well, I don't agree with the honourable gentleman. I think this government has a good record on affordable housing. It certainly has a considerably better record than the previous Labour government. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, has announced more money that will be used in part for affordable housing to make sure that we deal with what is absolutely a very genuine issue.
Mr Stephen Twigg.
I invite the Secretary of State to come to Liverpool and see the impact that the bedroom tax has had, in particular on some of the poorest communities, including those in my constituency. His remarks today will ring hollow to some of the poorest families in my constituency, and I would urge him to think again about this whole policy and suggest the best way to implement the court ruling is to repeal the bedroom tax.
Well, I'm always delighted to visit Liverpool, but I can only repeat to him that the court ruling in 5 of the 7 cases was actually in favour of the government, so I cannot sensibly draw the conclusions he draws from the judgments.
Williams.
Speaker, my own local authority, Cyngor Gwynedd, has used discretionary housing payments over years, year on year, helping around 1,000 of the 1,400 people affected by this charge, many of them disabled. But effectively protecting this government from the consequences of its own folly. Will the Minister accept that this wasteful churning bailouts cannot continue indefinitely?
No, well, as I've said, I think the use of discretionary housing payments to local authorities is proving successful. Inevitably, some local authorities are using it differently from others, but as indeed the court confirmed, it is a sensible and practical way to proceed to make sure that those who need help get that help.
Malhotra.
Can the Secretary of State confirm how much it would cost to exempt victims of domestic abuse from the bedroom tax? And how does that compare to how much money the government has spent defending the bedroom tax in court?
I don't think that first figure is available. If it is, I'll certainly write to her with it. I mean, she will be aware of that one of the 7 cases specifically related to that, and that the court found in favour of the government in that case. But obviously, the government is very proud of its record on domestic violence and domestic abuse. Any initiatives taken, and it is certainly an area which I keep under constant review.
Mr Patrick Grady.
Mr Speaker, when the Prime Minister said on the steps of Downing Street, I know you're working round, I know you're doing your best, and I know that sometimes life can be a struggle, the government I lead will be driven not by the interests of the privileged few, but by yours. Did that apply to everybody struggling, except those struggling with the bedroom tax?
Well, I'm glad the honourable gentleman has absorbed the words of the Prime Minister on the steps of Downing Street, which were indeed memorable and correct, and all government policies are related to achieving what she set out to achieve on the steps of Downing Street.
Pat Glass.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I can't stress too highly the pain that has been caused to families in my constituency where they're living with a family member who is disabled, many of whom have gone into debt to pay the bedroom tax. When can those families expect to get back the money that the government has taken from them illegally?
Well, I'm not sure if the honourable lady heard me when I said that all the cases, both the cases the government won and the government lost at the court last week, were in receipt of discretionary housing payments. So it's not a question of the money. They were getting money. It's a question of the structure of the policy, which is what the court has challenged. So the discretionary housing payments have been paid to those people.
All of them, all the time. Mark Durkan.
In trying to present the Supreme Court judgment as a 5-2 result, could the Secretary of State take more care not to imply that the Supreme Court found that discretionary housing payments were necessarily the best or only way of helping those in extra need? And when taking steps to comply in the other 2 judgments, would the Secretary of State not take the opportunity to have a wider and more fundamental recast of this controversial policy?
I'm not sure how else I can present. I could only present the facts, which were that there were 7 cases, 5 of which were won by the government, 2 won by other people. But I take his point about the wider policy, and obviously we look at all our policies all the time to ensure that they are delivering what they were set out to achieve.
Neil Coyle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In what can only be described as coalition fervour, my Liberal Democrat predecessor voted for the bedroom tax 8 times despite a severe local impact. Based on the court decision, how many of the 4,238 people hit by the bedroom tax in Southwark should not have been affected?
Yes.
I don't have figures at that level of detail, and I would hope that Southwark Council has indeed been assiduous in using discretionary housing payments to make sure that people have not lost out financially because those DHPs are available.
Mr Alan Brown.
Instead of standing here saying the Minister welcomes the fact that 5 judges found that a woman with a panic room should be subject to bedroom tax, should he not go away and looking at his policy altogether? Instead of targeting the people on the demand side, the government needs to look at the supply side of housing, end the right to buy, where a quarter of houses end up in the buy-to-let market, further pushing up the housing benefit bill. So target the right areas.
Well, I don't think I should stand at this dispatch box and challenge the Supreme Court. No. He's right about the supply side, though. The supply side is as important as the demand side. That's why this government is spending huge amounts of money to help the housing market generally, specifically the affordable housing market, and wish that previous governments had done the same.
Tracy Brabin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could the Minister tell us exactly how much the government has spent on legal fees defending one of the most hated policies, the bedroom tax?
Can I welcome the Honourable Lady to her place? The Department has spent approximately £206,000 in legal costs in respect of the Supreme Court proceedings.
Paula Sheriff.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituents, Anne and Kevin Gresham, who live in a 2-bedroom flat, are unable to share a room due to Anne's various disabilities. They successfully fought the bedroom tax in court, but this caused them significant heartache and stress. When will this government finally stop punishing the disabled, admit the cruel bedroom tax just isn't working, and axe the tax?
Well, as I said in response to previous honourable members, I don't agree with the honourable lady that the overall policy is not working, and we have no plans to change it.
Mike Kane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituency of Wythenshawe and Sale East has the highest number of bedroom tax cases, families affected in the country, at over 3,000 families. But I want to raise the case of Mr Tony Gunning in my constituency. He needs regular kidney dialysis. And he doesn't get a discretionary payment because he's Tory Trafford. If he lived in Labour Manchester in my constituency, he would have got the discretionary payment. He's been hit twice by the party opposite.
Well, I've said that I hope that local authorities will claim the discretionary housing payments that are available to them, and I would say that to all local authorities.